Hi, my name's Chris Webb and I work on the Power BI Customer Advisory team at Microsoft. In this session, you're going to learn about some of the advanced analytics features that are available in Power BI Desktop. Let's start off with a quote. Here's one from Donald Rumsfeld. It's quite a famous one from 2002. As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know. How does this relate to BI in general and Power BI in particular? Well, in the world of Power BI, we're often building reports to answer specific questions. We know what we don't know, and we want to build a report that's going to tell us what we don't know. So, for example, show me sales by month is a great example of that. We know we want to see sales by month, but we don't know what those sales actually are. Now, that's kind of bread and butter for BI. We need that. That's an inescapable part of life as a BI user. But the real business value from a BI tool, and Power BI is no different, is when you use it to find things that you just didn't know you didn't know. When you spot outliers, when you spot incredible cost savings that you just didn't know were possible. And that's what this presentation is all about. Because Power BI has a lot of functionality that people don't often think about using. A lot of people don't even know that's there, that can help them spot the things they didn't know they didn't know. And this is going to be maybe a slight job change for somebody like you, somebody who's building Power BI reports. Because if you're just a report designer, you're taking orders from your colleagues, the business, who say, well, here's what we don't know, just build a report for it. But if you can take a little bit more control, if you can get a little bit more involved in the analysis, rather than being somebody who builds that sales by month report, somebody who actively analyzes the data and looks for these hidden patterns and trends and these nuggets of information, that's when you're going to level up as a BI user. That's when you're going to be more useful to your business users. The reports you build for this are going to be slightly different to maybe the ones you normally build. They're not going to be ones that you build, you publish, that lots of people look at month on month. They're going to be ones that have maybe got a smaller audience. They're going to be ones that perhaps have got a shorter lifetime. But they're probably going to be way, way more valuable to the business because they're going to show these new patterns and trends that completely change the way things are done. And like I said, in this session, what I want to do is show you the features in Power BI that can help you do that. But I also put another constraint on myself. I wanted to show how you could do this type of analysis without writing any DAX or any M whatsoever. Before we get stuck into the demos, let me just say a word about the data that I'm going to be using in those demos. It's a pretty interesting data set in itself, especially if you're British. It's from the Land Registry. Now, the Land Registry is a UK government agency which registers all residential or commercial property sales transactions. So every time a house or a flat or a factory or an office block or something is sold in England or Wales, it has to be registered with the Land Registry, and that data is available for anybody to look at. So if you've ever wondered how the likes of Zoopla or Rightmove know how much the houses on your street have been sold for, this is where you can get that information. So you can get it from the gov.uk site. Here it is. You can download monthly data. You can download data for whole years. And what I've done is I've downloaded all of the data for 2018. I've brought it into a Power BI dataset. And I've got three tables here. I've got a table called Property Transactions, which has one row for every property transaction in England and Wales in the year 2018. And I've got a couple of dimension tables. So here's the property transactions table. Here's the data in it. You can see I've got a column called price. I've got a column called date. That gives me the date of the property transaction. I've got a bunch of columns which tell me the address of the property that was sold. Things like street, town, district, county, postcode. And I've got some columns that tell me about the property. So I've got a property type column here, which I'll talk about in a moment. I've got a new column, which contains Y or N values. Y means the property is new, N not. Ownership type, which contains the values F and L. F means freehold, L means leasehold. As far as this property type column goes, this is quite interesting. I've got a dimension table to look that up, and it tells me that in that property type column, D means detached, F means flat, S means semi-detached, T means terraced, and O means other. I've also got a date table. We should always have a date table in our Power BI dataset that allows me to look up dates and break them down into months, years, day numbers of week, and days of week. So that's the data that I'm going to be using for all of my analysis. Let's start by looking at line charts. I'm going to drop a line chart onto my canvas. Let's make it nice and big. I'm going to drop my date field onto axis. I've got a measure called count of sales. And here I've got a line chart that shows me the number of sales transactions that took place every day in 2018. Now you can see there are some patterns here. Let's make things a little bit easier to see. I'm going to drop a filter onto here on date. And let's filter the data so we only see the data towards the end of the year. Now there's an obvious repeating pattern here. It turns out that Fridays are the day that everybody likes to sell. And then immediately after Fridays, we've got Saturdays and Sundays when nobody sells anything, or at least nothing is registered with the land registry. Okay. So here's a line chart with many visuals over here in the visualizations pane. We've got this option of something that looks, I guess, a bit like a magnifying glass. And this allows us to add analytics to a visual. Now, some visuals don't have any options here, but line charts have got a couple of interesting things we can add. So for example, here we can add a trend line. There's our black dotted trend line. We can change the color, we can change the transparency, we can change whether it's dashed or solid or dotted, and so on. You can delete the trend line by just simply clicking the cross next to trend line. I can add a min line, a max line, a constant line, an average line, a median line. So let's just add a median line to be interesting. Let's make that black as well. And there we can see that's the median count of sales. There's something really much more interesting we can do here though. We've got this set of forecast options here. What does this allow us to do? Well, it allows us to predict what's going to happen in the future. So if we go back to looking at the end of the year, there's our nice obvious repeating pattern. Let's try and predict going forward from the end of this series what the next couple of weeks of sales will be. What I can do is I can click add to forecast. Let's add a forecast going forward 10 days. And you can see this gray area here with a line and some shading around it to show the confidence intervals, tells us what the forecast is. Now the trouble is, this is the end of the year. Nobody was selling properties at the end of December. So this is data we need to ignore. And we've got an option to do that. let's ignore the last 10 days and click apply. And if we assume that the end of December behaved like the rest of December, now we've got a much more accurate forecast going on here. That was pretty basic, but there is much more cool stuff we can do. Let's take a look at a scatter chart now. Scatter charts are really fun. I'm going to drop a scatter chart onto here. And what I want to do is maybe have a look at count of sales, but I want to compare the count of sales for different property types. Let's say flats and detached properties. And we want to see how that varies by county. Now, I can drag count of sales, all my measures, onto X or Y, but I want to really analyze count of sales for flats versus count of sales for detached. And this, you might think, would require a bit of DAX, but it doesn't, because I can automatically generate the calculation using a quick measure. So I'm going to create two quick measures, one which will give me the count of sales for flats and one which will give me the count of sales for detached. I can do that really easily by right-clicking on count of sales, go to quick measure, the type of calculation I want is a filtered value, and I want count of sales, but I only want the count of sales where the property type name equals flat. So click OK. I know I said I wouldn't write any DAX. I haven't written any DAX. Power BI has written the DAX for me. It's written some pretty good DAX. So here is a measure that gives me the count of sales for flats. Let's drag that onto the x-axis. I'm going to do this again for detached. Create a quick measure. Again, it's going to be a filtered value for property type name detached. Click OK. I'm going to drag that onto my y-axis, and I am going to put county as the details. So here we go, we've got a scatter chart showing county by the different types of count of sales. We've got a couple of things we need to fix here. So let's first of all turn on category labels so we can see the counties. And as you would expect, we've got an outlier in London. London is very different from the rest of the country, and it's kind of spoiling our visual. So let's ignore London. Let's just right click on here and click exclude. And now we've got a nice scatter chart showing our counties, showing how they vary by count of sales for detached, count of sales for flat. And you can see here, for example, City of Bristol has got a fairly large count of sales compared to the number of detached houses, whereas Lincolnshire tends to have more detached houses being sold rather than flats. Now, we've got some interesting things we can do on the analytics pane for a scatter chart as well. So let's go over to analytics. We've got trend lines, all of the things that we've got available for a line chart, but we've got some other interesting things down here. We've got symmetry shading and ratio lines. If I go to symmetry shading, what I'm going to do is just click add, turn it on. Let's increase the transparency so we can see a little bit more about what's happening here. And effectively what we've got is a straight line right through the middle of the visual. And what this is just a straight line that says, okay, let's draw a kind of line dividing count of sales for detached by count of sales for flat. So any county that was on this line would have basically an equal number of count of sales for detached and for flats. So this allows me to see very easily which counties have got slightly more sales for detached properties compared to flats, and vice versa. And we can see that something like Surrey and East Sussex sit nicely on that line. They've got an equal number of sales for detached and for flats. The ratio line does something similar, not quite the same. The ratio line allows you to say, well, okay, perhaps there is a natural difference between, flats to detached. So it will look and see what the ratio of flats to detached for the whole country was, work out what the ratio for the whole country is, and then see how, which counties differ compared to that actual ratio for the whole country. And if I add that in, you'll see we've got a slightly different line. Here's where that ratio normally goes. And we can see perhaps now that something like Hampshire is closer to the national average. There's some other cool things we can do with scatter charts as well. So let me just duplicate this page. I'm going to remove the symmetry shading and the ratio line. And now instead we can do some clustering automatically. So we go up to the ellipses up here, and you can see there is an option to automatically find clusters. So when I click this, a dialog appears. It's effectively going to create something like a new calculated column on my property transactions table. And it's going to look at county, look at these measures, and it's going to group the counties together into groups with similar behavior. I can specify a number of clusters or leave the algorithm to work out how many clusters there should be. Click OK. It will go away and crunch the numbers for a little bit. And what it's found are 3 distinct clusters of counties. These dark blue counties down here are the ones with not many sales for detached or flats. The kind of dark orange ones up here, they tend to be the more rural counties, I think, with more sales of detached and relatively fewer sales for flats. And these counties up here are the ones with a kind of large number of sales for flats, perhaps maybe slightly more sales for flats, but a fairly large number of sales for detached properties as well. There's some interesting functionality buried in column charts as well. Let's build a simple column chart that looks at count of sales by month name. So here we go. That's fairly easy. What we can see here, for example, is that if you compare June to July, there were more sales in June compared to July. Why is that? So Power BI can help us find the answer. If I click on July, right click, go to Analyze, I've got 2 options here. Explain the decrease from June to July and find where this distribution is different. Let's look at Explain the decrease first of all. So if I click Explain the decrease, a dialog is going to pop up trying to tell us why there was a 7.43 decrease in the count of sales between June and July. And what we get is this dialog with a number of different visuals and types of analysis trying to explain it. The top one tells us that Fridays accounted for the majority of the decrease between day of week. And we've got a visual that actually shows this. I can see this as a different type of visual, not a waterfall, but a scatter chart, or a clustered column chart, or an area chart. But I think the waterfall tells me most of all. It turns out that actually this is pretty much the answer. Because, as I said earlier, people like to sell their houses on Fridays. Fridays account for the vast majority of sales. And it turns out that June 2018 had 5 Fridays in it, July 2018 had 4 Fridays in it. And that's basically why the number of sales changed. We've got a variety of other explanations here that we can use. If we like these things, we've even got some provide feedback buttons, and I can even take this visual and add it to the page if I want. I don't really want that there, so let's get rid of that. What about this other option? This allows us to do more or less the same thing, but in a slightly different way. So let's click Analyze, find where this distribution is different. Again, the dialog pops up to try and help us analyze the data. And again, it's told us that the distribution of days of the week is different going from June to July. What we've got, if we have a zoom in, is a dual axis chart. The grey line shows us count of sales. The blue columns show us the count of sales for Fridays. We can see that June, with that 5th Friday, has a particularly large count of sales for Fridays compared to July. This is comparing proportions. I can change this to look at absolute values. I think proportions are maybe more useful. And I've also got a slicer thingy here that allows me to look at sales on Thursdays and sales on Mondays. And once again, I've got a variety of different ways of breaking this down, maybe looking at other different dimensions, for example, ownership type, and I can provide feedback and I can pin a visual to the page as well. We can also do some useful things with grouping and binning. Let's take day of the week. So with day of the week, we can look at count of sales by day of the week. But maybe we want to break things down by weekdays versus weekends. So what I'm going to do here is click on my day of week column. This column tools tab will open up here on the ribbon. And I've got a data groups button on here. So what I can do is click on this, click on new data groups. I'm going to create a new data group based on day of the week. I'm going to call it weekday or weekend. It's going to be a group of type list. So I'm going to take Monday to Friday, click group. It's automatically created a name based on all of the days, but I'm going to call this group weekday. I'm going to take Saturday and Sunday, group it, call it weekend. I've got the option to include another group if I wanted to, but I haven't got any extra values. Click OK. And now I can add this into here. And I can have a look at sales compared to weekdays or weekends. So that's a list. I can also bin numeric values. This is maybe a little bit more complicated. Let's create a new page here. And let's click on the price column. Remember, this contains the price paid for each sales transaction. So perhaps it would be interesting, rather than looking at distinct transactions, let's bin these transactions up into buckets of £25,000. So if I click on data groups, new data groups up here again, I'm going to leave the name as price bins. And I'm going to group transactions together into these bins. It can do this automatically, but what I'm going to do, and I can create bins based on size or number. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a bin type based on size, and rather than use the bin size here, I'm going to say I want to have a bin size of £25,000. So every single property transaction will be put into a bin. The first bin will be £0 to £25,000. Next one will be £25,000 to £50,000, and so on. Click OK. Again, it's going to go away and create something like a kind of new calculated column, although you're not going to see any DAX for this. And when this is ready, I'll be able to use this new bin column, price bins column, like any other one. And we should be done fairly soon. These things always take longer when you're watching them. And there are almost about 1 million transactions here, I think. And we're good. Let's create a stacked bar chart. Let's take my new price bins column and put it onto axis. Let's drag count of sales onto values. This doesn't look all that great. I've got to do something else here. At the moment, because this is a numeric column, Power BI thinks the y-axis is continuous, but it's not. It's actually categorical. These bins are individual categories. And it's sorted them by count of sales, which I don't want. I want this to be sorted by count of sales, and I want to see this sorted in ascending order. So the smallest bins come first. Oh, sorry. Sort by price bins. There we go. So there's the first bin for £0 to £25,000. There's the one that goes from £25,000 to £50,000 and so on. And we can make this even more colourful by going to property type, dragging property type name into legend. And you can see that it's the other category that's almost exclusively making up the sales for the £0 to £25,000 category. Terraced makes up a much larger part of the cheaper properties, and then as we get further in, it's detached that is maybe making up more of a proportion of the more expensive properties. Now, some of the visuals we've looked at so far have had some kind of AI built in for doing clustering and things like that and forecasting, but there are 2 visuals, and more coming in the future, built into Power BI that are explicitly built around using AI and machine learning to help you understand and analyze your data. The first one that I'm going to look at is the key influences visual. So there's a lot to see here, but I'm going to drop a key influences visual on an empty page here. And let's see what we can do with it. So the first thing to see when we click on the key influences visual are these 3 wells that we've got here. First one to look at is analyze. This is the thing that we want to analyze. Now you can drop a measure in here, or you can drop a field from a table. Let's start by looking at what happens with measures. So I'm going to drag average price paid into here. And you can see up here at the top, we've got a drop down that says, well, what influences average price paid to either increase or decrease? Now, to make this work, we've got to look at some other fields from tables in our data set to say, well, what happens is there something that we can use in any of these columns, in any of these fields, to explain or to look and see when average price paid might increase or decrease. So, what are the things we might look at? For example, county could be interesting. So I'm going to drag county into explain by. Maybe town has got something interesting here. Maybe property type name could tell us something. Maybe whether the property is old or new, or maybe even something like day of week could be interesting here. So, having dragged all of these things in here, what we can see is that it's found that something fairly obvious influences average price paid to increase, and that is where the county is Greater London. Now, obviously, London is going to be more expensive than anywhere else. But we've got a nice visual here that also shows us a graph and chart with Greater London and the rest of the counties and the average price paid. We can flip this over to decrease, and now it tells us something different, that average price tends to decrease where property type name is flat, or maybe to a lesser extent, property type name is terraced. Now that's looking at a measure value. But what happens if we want to look at values in an actual column? So rather than saying what influences a measure to increase or decrease, perhaps what we can do is look at transactions and say, let's see what predicts a value in a particular column. You might be looking at credit card fraud and say, what is it about a transaction that says this transaction is going to be fraudulent? Now, we don't have anything like that here, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say, well, let's drag new up into the analyze field here. So remember, the new column contains y or n values. Y tells us the property is new, n tells us it isn't. So is there anything in county, town, property type name, or day of week that tells us whether the property is likely to be new or not? Now, if we have a look here for new equals to y, this is going to tell us something perhaps about what it is that influences whether a property is new or not. And what we've got here is a list of towns where new properties are much more likely to be sold. So we've got a lot of different towns here. We could take town away and look at what we get without going down to the town level. And for example, here you can see counties Windsor and Maidenhead, Wokingham, Milton Keynes. These are county councils rather than counties. I know British people watching will probably be saying these aren't counties, but they're county councils. And you can see that Windsor and Maidenhead has a much greater chance of new properties being sold. So this is obviously where new properties are being built. We've also got up here this top segment section, which allows me to analyze things in a little bit more detail. So if we're looking at new properties again, we've got some segmentation, some grouping taking place. All of the transactions have been grouped into different segments. And if I look at segment 1, which has got a really large percentage of new properties, I can click on that and you can see that that's mostly made up of flats in Greater London, which again makes a lot of sense. If I look at segment 2, that's sales which are not in Greater London, not on a Friday, but for flats. Segment 3 is sales on a Friday. Segment 4 is Friday flats. And you can see that there's a pattern emerging here. I think we can say that, go on here, flats and or Greater London are more about the kind of obvious predictors for a property being new. And as well as the information we've got up here, we've got something like the explain the increase or decrease down here that tells us even more about this particular distribution. The second AI visual, and the only other one that I'm going to be allowed to talk about, at least at the time of recording, is the decomposition tree. So if I drag the decomposition tree on here, let me just show you what it does in a simple way. Again, I've got analyze and explain by fields. So let's analyze average price paid. And what the decomp tree allows me to do is break down average price paid by other fields in a tree-like structure. So let's say we want to explain this maybe by county and by town and then by property type name. What I can do now is take average price paid, click this plus button, and let's say we'll break it down by county. And then maybe let's break Buckinghamshire down by town. And then maybe let's break this down by property type name. We can explore this. I can click on different towns. I can click on different counties and see all the towns in those counties. And, you know, it's a really nice, useful visual. But I know what you're thinking. How is this AI? You know, it's just a visual. It's just showing what's there. Well, maybe we don't want to break it down by county, town, and property type name. What is the best way to break down average price paid based on the data we've got? Well, I don't know. Maybe county is right, maybe it isn't. So what I can do instead here is click on the plus button and click on high value or low value. So what is it that's going to kind of give me the best breakdown based on high value? And it turns out that it's town. Let's maybe break this down by high value again. And it's told me, well, county, okay, county is, town is county, but let's break this down by high value. And it's other. So this allows us to explore the data and say, well, okay, what is the best way of analyzing average price paid? Is it town, county, property type name? Well, you know, you tell me. Don't forget that custom visuals have also got a role to play to help you analyze your data. Let's just take a look at a couple of custom visuals that do things. Some of them can be quite complicated in their analysis. Some of them can be visually quite fun. Some of them can be downright silly. But let's go and import a custom visual. The first one that I'll have a look at is the outliers detection custom visual. This one's actually built in R by somebody at Microsoft. So I'm going to drop that onto here. And what it does is detect outliers. So maybe what we can do is we can drag dates, and let's see if there were any outliers by date that would, based on count of sales. So let's add that here. So what we've got here is a list of all dates, that count of sales. It's found 2 outliers, and if I hover over it, what we can see is that the 29th of June 2018 was a bit of an outlier. It had just over 20,000 sales. And what have we got here? The 30th of November 2018, again an end of a month, also had a peak in terms of sales. So that's a very specific type of analysis. Let's have a look at another one, which is visually quite appealing. This is Sanddance, which was built by Microsoft Research. Let's drop this in here. Sanddance is almost a visualization tool inside a visualization tool. It's available as a standalone component, but it's also available as a Power BI custom visual. You'll see what I mean by it being almost its own visualization tool. But I'm going to create a full page. Let's drag average price paid in here, count of sales, drop that in. Let's have a look at day of week, new, and property type name. Let's also bring date in here. So looking at dates, we can start off with a great big grid. that doesn't look very interesting. But we've got this color by option, and so maybe let's color by count of sales, and let's sort this by date. And there's the 1st of January. There is the last day. And we can see we've got a nice kind of heat map type effect where all of the coloring by count of sales shows us the days where count of sales was particularly large. We could turn this into a scatter chart. We could turn this into a column chart. Let's make this into a stack instead. Let's put day of week on X. Let's put property type name on here. For Z axis, let's put count of sales. I'm going to color by new, and let's in fact sort by new as well. And I know 3D visualization is very frowned on, but sometimes it's nice to show it just to impress people. We can also take this, turn it back into a grid, have even more 3D fun. I've shown enough of this. I really don't want to give you ideas about using 3D inside visualization, which is a generally bad thing. The final feature that I'm going to talk about is, in my opinion, I think the coolest of all of the analytics features built into Power BI. But for whatever reason, it's one that people don't really seem to use that much. And it's Q&A. So Q&A allows you to allow your end users to query the data in your dataset using natural language. It works in either English or Spanish. And the success of it will depend on how well you've modeled your data, what names you've used, and how well you tune your Q&A model. But actually, you can get some really great results. Now, I haven't really done anything to my model yet, but I can create a Q&A visual just by dropping one here on the canvas. And you'll see that when it first gets created, without doing anything else, I've got a box up here at the top where I can type to ask a question, and I've got some suggested questions that have been automatically generated for me here. And if I like what I see here, I could say, well, top towns by count of sales, and I get a visual already. And it gives me at least an idea for what type of questions could be asked here. I can also change these suggested questions if I want. But let's see what we can do with Q&A. Now, remember, I haven't done anything to tune the model at this point. All I've done is just follow good modeling practice and use human readable names. So I can start to type a question here like show average price paid. And at this point, I've got a number in a card, that's average price paid. You'll see the blue line underneath average price paid. That means that it's a term that's been understood by, let's say, country. It's recognized it as county. You can also see here, as soon as I start to type, that I've got a drop-down box here that gives me some suggestions, or gives me and the end user some suggestions about terms, because remember with that clustering demo we had a column called county clusters created. So when I say by county, do I mean county or do I mean county clusters? Actually, I mean county here. I can change the visual type. So this is a bar chart, but I could say as column chart, and now it's a column chart. And sorted by average price, not rice, price paid It's already sorted by average price paid in descending order. So in ascending order. And then maybe let's filter it a little bit more, where average price paid is greater than £300,000. So you can see that just by typing a question, we can build up some really quite cool visuals. Now, like I said, I haven't trained this at all, and I can, give Power BI a few more ideas about the types of question that people are likely to ask, and train it so it's even more responsive. So if I click on this Teach Q&A option, a pop-up appears. I've got some suggested questions here. So, I could say, show average price paid by county. I think maybe that's going to be more useful than anything I've had before. So let's add that. We'll save it. And now, if we delete all of this, you can see that my suggested question has appeared rather than one of the randomly generated ones. I think this is more useful. What about situations where I'm entering a term that Power BI doesn't recognize? There are a couple of things that we can do here. So if we go back to this dialog, we've got synonyms we can set up here. So here I can set up synonyms for individual fields and measures and so on. Property transactions, maybe there's a term here that I can add. So this is actually going to be a real estate sale, perhaps, and add that as a synonym. So if somebody types in real estate sale, it'll be recognized as a property transaction. We've got some suggested terms here. If there is something that I don't want to appear in Q&A, I can click this slider. I can see questions that other end users have reviewed and submitted. I can also teach Q&A, and this is really cool. I can teach it from here. I can teach it also in Power BI Desktop from the main dialog. So let's ask a question that Power BI isn't likely to know about. Let's say show costliest counties. Now, what we can see here is a red underline underneath costliest. And if we submit this, and we can say the costliest counties are the ones, well, we've got some suggestions that have high average price paid. Let's put a space there. It's been recognized. And we can see a preview of a result, show top 10 county, and there we are, there's our top counties. And now if I save this, I can also see the terms that have been created here and delete them again if I want. But now if I go back here and I say show costliest counties, there we are. There are the counties with the highest average price paid. Now this might not seem advanced to you because it's creating fairly simple visuals, but for an end user that can't build a Power BI report, that gets confused by slicers and so on, just the ability to enter a search term like this, enter a question and be able to get a result without needing to know anything about building a Power BI report is, I think, at least in my opinion, advanced analytics for the less technical user. So I strongly recommend, if you're building Power BI reports for a large audience, invest some time in Q&A, put a Q&A visual on a page, and let your end users go out there and explore the data themselves just by asking questions. And that's it from me. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found something interesting, something useful that you'll be able to use in your Power BI reports that will help you discover new things that you didn't even know were there inside your data. Bye-bye.